Don't be a know-it-all. It turns out that there's many times, if we're not careful, we'll think we know the answer to something before we even begin investigating. I've had cases where we've been at crime scenes and a senior partner, on the basis of maybe his 25-year experience doing this, will make a quick decision. Oh, I think it's so-and-so, or I think it's her boyfriend who did it. Really? We haven't even started to collect the evidence yet. We haven't even started to chart the potential suspects. And you think you already, listen, bud, I've been doing these kinds of cases for 25 years. I know when I see it. Now, that person might be right about his inference, but you don't begin by thinking you know the answer to something. If you do, you're liable to Now, as it turns out, I had a case like this where we spent a whole week trying to find the boyfriend. It wasn't even the boyfriend. It was a brother involved. So you could be very careful about thinking you know the answer before you begin. You have to kind of start by presuming nothing. Start by just looking at the evidence and letting the evidence speak for itself. Now, I say this only because you probably know somebody in your life who has some presupposition which already excludes the Christian worldview. Maybe there's somebody, for example, who says, well, look, unless you can demonstrate something with science, I can't believe it. Well, that's a presupposition they're beginning with that might color the way they're looking at evidence. It might exclude certain approaches to evidence. They might say, well, I don't believe in anything supernatural. So whatever you're going to say about Christianity, you cannot include anything supernatural because I reject the supernatural. Really? Well, we're making a case to determine if something supernatural occurred in the first century. If you're trying to investigate that, you can't begin by thinking you know that nothing supernatural ever occurs. We're all going to have to take our presuppositions and suspend them, at least for a season, so we can look at the evidence fairly. If you're not willing to do that, don't be surprised if you won't come to the right conclusion. And help your friends, help your own kids, help yourself to try to resist the temptation to think you already know the answer. Be fair, be open-minded, and be diligent. Now, I want to give you also another way of inferring to the most reasonable explanation. It's something we call abductive reasoning. But before I begin to explain it, let me make sure you understand there's a huge distinction between what's possible and what's reasonable. As an investigator, I don't even care about what's possible. Anything and everything's possible. It's possible that you're not even watching this right now. It's possible you're just dreaming all of this, that you're in a matrix kind of world in which you haven't taken the pill yet to know that you're still in the matrix. That's possible, but it's not reasonable. The standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt in criminal trials. Why? Because you could never prove anything beyond a possible doubt. Nothing. You could prove beyond it. I could always raise some possible doubt, as ridiculous as it may be. The standard is not possible doubt, it's actually reasonable doubt. It's a little bit lower, because what we care about is the most reasonable inference from evidence. Now let me tell you how you get to the most reasonable inference from evidence. It's called abductive reasoning, but it's really also known as inferring to the most reasonable explanation. And we do this at every call-out, every crime scene. Because sometimes we get there and there's somebody dead, but it may not be a crime. There are 4 ways to die. Only one of them is criminal. We're trying to figure out, is this a natural? Is this an accidental death? Is this a suicide? Or is this a homicide? If it's a homicide, that changes everything. And our entire team is going to get involved trying to solve that. But when you get there, you've got to make a decision. Which kind of scene is it? Well, how do you make that kind of decision? Well, we use abductive reasoning. Now, what that involves is making 2 lists that begin with E. A list of evidences. All the evidence we see in the room. A list of explanations, ways to explain the evidence in the room. Let me give you an example from a death scene, for example. Okay, we make a list. We've got some dead guy on the ground. You'll see this in your participant's guide. We've got a dead guy laying on the ground. And so far, with what little we have, if there's nothing else there, just a dead person laying face down, well, how do we know what kind of death that is? That could be one of those 4 deaths. Well, we list the evidence. And as the scene is different, if there's a stab wound, or if there's a gunshot wound, or if there's a piece of evidence at the crime scene, we will start to cross out those explanations that don't make sense given the evidence in the room. Pretty simple approach. Could you use that approach to examine Christianity? Well, I think you could. As a matter of fact, I used it as a new Christian or a new investigator of Christianity to really understand the evidence for the resurrection. Now think about that. We've got a crime scene, an empty tomb, And we have to determine what's the best explanation for it. So let's make a list of the evidences in the room. I'll give you the simplest evidences that even the most skeptical scholars, for the most part, to a certain level of certainty will agree on. 70% or so would say this. Even as unbelievers, they would say, well, okay, so Jesus lived, and he was crucified, and he died on that cross and was buried. Okay, that's a pretty simple claim. Doesn't mean the resurrection is true. Doesn't mean Christianity is true. Okay, we'll add something to that. How about the fact that there's an empty tomb? Oh, okay, but that doesn't mean Christianity is true. I could explain the empty tomb some other way. Okay, how about this? The disciples, they seem to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. They reported it, and they lived their lives as though they believed it. Okay, that's fine, but that doesn't mean Christianity is true. Lots of people believe all kinds of crazy things. How about this? They actually were they were transformed after seeing the risen Christ. I mean, they were so adamant about their beliefs. Within 4 or 5 generations, the entire Roman Empire was being affected by Christianity. That still doesn't mean Christianity is true. Okay, but that's at least the minimal evidence. That's just some simple evidence in the scene that we have to explain. Well, there are a number of ways to explain that evidence. It might just be true. It might just be exactly as the Gospels reported it. The Gospels might just be accurate. As a skeptic, I don't think so. There's got to be another way to explain this. For example, maybe he didn't really die on the cross. If Jesus was only badly injured and passed out, you wouldn't need a resurrection. You can actually, it's just a resuscitation. Maybe they hallucinated this. Maybe they lied about it. Maybe there was an imposter involved. Maybe this thing was a story that was changed over time. Do you see how I could offer a number of other explanations for the basic evidence surrounding the resurrection? Well, now we get to employ abductive reasoning. We simply ask the question, do these explanations work given the evidence we have in the room? Now, in your participants guide, you're going to see why I think each of the non-Christian explanations, the naturalistic explanations involving no miracle, involving no resurrection, why each of those doesn't work. They are all fatally flawed. And I want to encourage you to look through the participants guide to see why each of these doesn't work. Well, then you're going to eventually get to the Christian explanation. And I would have told you, though, as an atheist, that doesn't work either. It's also fatally flawed, I would have said. And you, well, why? Well, because it involves and requires a supernatural event called the resurrection. And I would have said, hey, you cannot include supernatural events in history. That's not history. History does not involve miracles. If you read an ancient account about something and it involves a miracle, you're now talking about mythology, not history. It's a category difference. So I would have said, no, I'm out. But now we go back to the first principle we talked about in this session, your presuppositions. Be careful about presuming you know for sure that nothing supernatural can ever occur. You don't know that for sure. And if you presume that, then of course everything seems silly if it involves a miracle. But what if that's just your bias, your presupposition talking? We said you've got to suspend presuppositions. If you do that, you'll see that the Christian explanation is by far the most robust and efficient way to explain the basic pieces of evidence in the scene. Now, I've given you 2 skills that I think you can actually use going forward. Presuppositions, making sure you don't have any of those, and 2, using abductive reasoning. Now, we actually have these call-out bags. These are bags that we use. I get my gloves in here, you name it. Everything I need, my camera's in here, flashlights are in this bag. I've had a bag just like it for well over 15 years. And every time I wear it out, I just buy another one just like it. And what do I put in here? I put in here all the stuff that'll help me solve cases. Well, I've just given you 2 skill sets that you can put in your call-out bag. 1, be careful of presuppositions, and 2, use abductive reasoning to determine what's true. And those are skills you can take with you as you investigate any claim going forward. Those are new skills, new tools for your call-out bag so you can be the best Christian case maker God has designed you to be.